Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from Antiwar.com, and this is Antiwar News for Thursday, August 11th, 2022. The first story at the top of Antiwar.com. We have a lot of China stuff for you today. This first story: China's military has announced that they had completed various tasks around Taiwan after days of military exercises, but they said that they will conduct regular patrols in the area, signaling that Beijing will keep up the pressure on the island in the wake of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. In a statement, China's People's Liberation Army's Eastern Theater Command said that it had successfully completed these tasks, but they added that they will, quote, keep an eye on the changes in the situation in the Taiwan Strait, continue to carry out training and preparation for combat, organize regular combat readiness patrols in the direction of the Taiwan Strait, and resolutely defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity. And quote, so since Pelosi visited Taiwan, the Chinese military conducted its largest ever military exercises around the island. We've been covering this a lot. I don't want to be too redundant here, but we saw Nancy Pelosi. She chimed in on Wednesday and she said that the US can't let China establish a new normal around Taiwan. She said, quote, what we saw with China is that they were trying to establish a sort of new normal, and we just can't let that happen. And quote, well, Pelosi is the reason why this is happening. So now you just see this cycle of she provoked this, and now she's saying the US can't let it happen, which implies action from the US to stop it. And tensions could really escalate further depending on how the US responds to this. We've seen multiple US officials say that they're planning to send planes and ships into sensitive waters near China, including the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. So the next one here, China released a new white paper for Taiwan, which is a document that it's released every few decades. The last time it released one was in 2000. So for the first time in over 2 decades, China released a new white paper on Taiwan that lays out Beijing's goals for the island. Now, the document emphasizes that China's goal is for peaceful reunification, but also makes clear that it won't rule out military force if foreign intervention and what they call separatist forces go too far. The document reads, quote, we will work with the greatest sincerity and exert our utmost efforts to achieve peaceful reunification, end quote. So we've seen China has, said this over and over. This has been their longstanding policy that they prefer peaceful reunification, but that they won't rule out the use of force. The document said, quote, we will only be forced to take drastic measures to respond to the provocation of separatist elements or external forces should they ever cross our red lines, end quote. So this came again right after Pelosi visited, right after as they were wrapping up these major military exercises around Taiwan. So this signals that they are releasing this and that they're going to speed up their efforts to unify with Taiwan. The paper, it directly addressed U.S. intervention in Taiwan, said, quote, some forces in the U.S. are making every effort to incite groups inside Taiwan to stir up trouble and use Taiwan as a pawn against China, end quote. The document says that if U.S. intervention is left unchecked, it will continue and just escalate tensions and make the situation worse for China as well as for the U.S. And the paper calls for more cross-strait communication and says that China wants to work toward a one country, two systems arrangement with Taiwan. And that's referring to the governing system that they have with Hong Kong that they've had since the British handed over Hong Kong in 1997. Of course, critics will always point to China's recent, the national security law that they passed as an example of how that could never work. But Taiwan is very different than Hong Kong. It's an island. They have a military. China would prefer to absorb Taiwan, just keep it autonomous, as long as it's part of China. They don't want to have to send their military to take over that island. It would be a massive operation. And of course, when it comes with Hong Kong too, I mean, that was also China pointed to foreign intervention. That's how they justified passing that national security law. The U.S. supported protesters in Hong Kong, so U.S. intervention is just not the way, if that's what you're concerned about. And also the under the handover, the 1997 handover, there was supposed to be some sort of national security law. It was in that agreement, but it was never passed. So China made its own. It looks like. But anyway, so the document again says that they're just going to continue cross-strait communication. And the next story here is related to that. Taiwan's opposition Kuomintang party sends delegation to mainland China. So the Kuomintang, known as KMT, they have sent a delegation to mainland China amid heightened tensions, a move that has drawn criticism from the island's ruling party, the independence-leaning Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. Now that's the party of Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen, and she has criticized the trip, said it disappointed the people of Taiwan, and sent the wrong message to the international community. The trip comes after, again, these unprecedented military exercises, so that's a big part of the criticism, is that they're going during all these tensions with these drills going on. And the vice chair of the KMT defended the trip. They've said that the focus will be meeting with the Taiwanese business community in the mainland, and that there are no plans to hold political talks with Beijing, although they left open that possibility. The vice chair of the KMT told Financial Times before leaving for the mainland that they don't have any plans to meet with Chinese officials, but it's possible that they might encounter them while they're there. A KMT source told the Taiwanese newspaper Liberty Times that the delegation was originally supposed to meet with top Chinese officials in charge of Taiwan relations, but the plans were scrapped after the itinerary was leaked. So the trip has also faced criticism from KMT members who are unhappy that it comes during these military drills. We've seen some of them speak out. But ultimately, this delegation, it represents the major split between the KMT and the DPP and how they view relations with Beijing. The DPP and Tsai, they lean toward independence, and they want Taiwan to be a separate country from the mainland. Tsai has said that Taiwan is a de facto independent state and that she doesn't need to officially declare independence. And that if she did that, that would almost certainly spark intervention from Beijing. They've made that pretty clear that if Taiwan declares independence, they will make a move. Now, on the other hand, you got the KMT, the Kuomintang, and they agree with the one China principle in theory, but they don't really want to recognize Beijing as the government that rules China. But they do lean more toward unifying with the mainland, but they've come under a lot of political pressure because of this and for their contacts with Beijing. The last time the KMT sent a delegation to the mainland was in 2019. So it's interesting because the Kuomintang is the party of Chiang Kai-shek, and that's who the U.S. backed against Mao during the Chinese Civil War. Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT, they fled to Taiwan in 1949, and that's when the U.S. recognized his government as the only government of China. They recognized the island of Taiwan as China, even though they had no control over the mainland. And that changed, when Nixon went to China to meet with Mao in 1972, and it became formal in 1979 when Washington formally severed relations with Taipei. So now this is Taiwanese internal politics, and I'm not too familiar with them, but it seems like it's something that we should be following as Taiwan is becoming such a pivotal issue. So it's something, we're going to keep an eye on. But it's definitely interesting the split. And from what I understand, neither side is really politically that popular. If you come out strong pro independence and you say you're going to declare independence, that's not really going to get you elected. On the other hand, if you come out strong unification and you say we're going to unify with China, that's also not really going to win elections. Um, because it would be such a major change. Independence probably means war at some level. Unifying has just a lot of implications that people in Taiwan don't like, but it's also split. I mean, we saw there's a lot of people in Taiwan that were opposed to Pelosi's visit and some people that supported it. But again, it's just an issue that is going to be very important as we go down the line, and we'll see how elements in Taiwan are responding to what the US is doing, which is clearly they want to use Taiwan as to counter China. They want to use Taiwan against China, and it's pretty clear. So we'll just see how the politics, develop around that. So the next one here, this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So over the past few months, we keep seeing reports that President Biden is considering lifting Trump's China tariffs, but he hasn't done anything yet. That's why Biden has kept Trump's China policies going and escalated them in many areas. So now there's this new report from Reuters that's saying Biden is considering a range of options on what to do with the tariffs. They've been considering cutting them, so they say. I mean, we haven't seen them actually do anything, but now, because of these military drills, they're apparently considering new tariffs on China. And again, it's this they provoke a response and now they have to do something about it, even though they got us into this mess in the first place. But yeah, I don't know. I would be very shocked if he lifts tariffs after all this. I think it's been pretty clear that he doesn't want to. And Kyle linked to a report that found over that Trump era tariffs on Chinese tech imports have cost U.S. firms $32 billion from July 2018 to the end of 2021. So Americans are the ones footing the bill for these tariffs. And you would think, with inflation so high and gas prices so high, it would be a good time to cut them, but we haven't seen that happen yet. Okay, so that's it for the China stuff. So this next one is Ukraine, Russia. Ukrainian officials make conflicting claims about blast at Russian airbase in Crimea. So on Tuesday, we saw this big series of explosions at a Russian airbase in Crimea. And now Ukrainian officials are making these conflicting claims about them. Russia, for their part, they've downplayed the incident. They said it was caused by an ammunition explosion that they're saying was an accident and that they're investigating the cause. But we saw on Tuesday an advisor to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. He denied altogether that Ukraine was behind the blasts. Said they didn't do it. But on Wednesday, an anonymous Ukrainian government official told the Washington Post that the explosions were an attack carried out by Ukraine's special forces, which, if that's true, that would mark a pretty significant escalation in the war. The official didn't offer any details on how the attack was carried out, and at this point, nothing is confirmed. This is one of those situations where it's just really hard to know what happened. Two sides are saying different things. But again, Ukraine hasn't officially taken credit for the blasts, and Russia continues to downplay the incident. In his nightly address on Tuesday, Zelensky didn't mention the explosions, but he did discuss Crimea. His comments were kind of focused on Crimea. He said that we're going to take it back. That's a talking point we've seen from him and his advisors a lot. They're saying they're going to retake Crimea, which Russia has controlled since 2014. It would require a major offensive for them to do that, let alone the other territory that Russia has captured since they invaded, including Kherson, which is the oblast, the province north of Crimea. So they would have to get that back first, too, you would think. But these incidents, there was also on July 31st, a small drone hit the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which is in Crimea. The damage was minimal, and it's not clear who was behind that attack. Russia also kind of downplayed that. We didn't see any Ukrainians take credit, but we've seen attacks inside Russian territory, not in Crimea, in mainland Russia, I guess you would call it, since the invasion started. And Ukraine hasn't officially taken credit for those, even though it's pretty clear that they've been doing it. I think they're just not taking credit because they just fear that it could, risk provoking a response from Russia. But this would be, if this is an attack from Ukraine and they're going to start launching attacks in Crimea, it would represent kind of a new phase in the war. Okay, the next one, we left the one up from yesterday that Zelensky wants to ban all Russian travelers, and he said that the whole population of Russia is responsible for the war. Next, we have Somalia. So the U.S. bombed Somalia on Tuesday, and according to U.S. Africa Command, they launched 3 airstrikes, and they are claiming that their initial assessment found 4 al-Shabaab fighters were killed and that no civilians were harmed. But it's always important to mention that the Pentagon is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties, especially in Somalia, where U.S. operations are shrouded in secrecy. I linked to a good report from Nick Turse there. Actually, I have to fix that link. That's the wrong one. But it's at The Intercept, and it's about how the U.S. has undercounted civilian casualties in Somalia, because in Somalia, there's no sort of Western media presence on the ground. In the areas that al-Shabaab controls, a lot of people don't have phones and stuff, so it's just really difficult to know what's going on the ground. And whenever journalists or like human rights groups, Amnesty International, for instance, whenever they get to the scene of a U.S. drone strike in Somalia, it's a completely different story than what the Pentagon said. They almost always find civilian casualties. There's no accountability for these strikes, is just what I'm trying to get at here. And, we can't take their word that there's no civilians dead. Now, this was the second U.S. bombing in Somalia within 1 month, and that signals that the U.S. might be escalating the drone war. Back in May, President Biden ordered the deployment of 500 troops to Somalia, reversing a drawdown carried out at the end of the Trump administration. The Trump-era withdrawal, it repositioned U.S. forces into neighboring Djibouti and Kenya, which enabled the U.S. to continue the drone war despite having a smaller presence in Somalia. So under Trump, we really saw a big escalation in Somalia. He sent regular troops back there for the first time in years and years. That's the thing, he took some out, but he was the one that sent them there in the first place. But his drone strikes were really high. I linked to something here that I wrote last year. For instance, in 2020, AFRICOM conducted 52 airstrikes in Somalia. They conducted 63 in 2019, 47 in 2018. So you just see how it rose every year under Trump. And since Biden came in, it actually has significantly declined the number of U.S. airstrikes in Somalia. But again, he sent some troops there, and now we're seeing more airstrikes. So it's kind of it seems like this is an escalation of a war that nobody seems to care about or want to talk about. So they're fighting al-Shabaab, and U.S. military leaders really like to hype up the threat of al-Shabaab because they're a large group and they're affiliated with al-Qaeda. But it's always important to mention that they only pledged loyalty to al-Qaeda in 2012 after years of fighting the U.S. and its proxies. The first attack that al-Shabaab took credit for was in 2007, and it was against Ethiopian troops. The U.S. backed an Ethiopian invasion of Somalia in 2006. I linked to a good piece here. We learned that from WikiLeaks that the U.S. really leaned on Ethiopia to launch this invasion. This is just crucial context because al-Shabaab is a local. There's no reason to think that they're like a global threat. They're a very local group, and they have, their reasons to not like the US. But it's just important context there. So the next one, the EU is expecting a quick response on the Iran nuclear deal. This is from Jason Ditz. So we saw negotiators in Vienna from the US, Iran, and the EU a few days ago. It seemed like a quick trip to Vienna. They had some talks. The EU presented what they called was a final text, and now they're just waiting for both sides to respond. So it's not clear what's going to happen. We don't know what the EU offer was, but they're trying to really salvage this deal. This is another thing. You got the EU talk about oil prices and stuff. We've seen, at least I've seen French officials say that how about we lift sanctions on Iran and Venezuela while oil prices are so high, and you have us banning Russian energy to alleviate some of the pressure. So that could be part of the EU's motivation. But we'll just see what happens with that. I'm pretty skeptical that the Biden administration will do what it takes to revive that deal. This is another one from Jason Ditz in Yemen. We saw some infighting between the Saudi-backed government. At least 35 killed as government separatists clash in South Yemen. So this is fighting basically between the Saudi-backed government and UAE-backed separatists in the south there in Shabwa. And this does kind of risk we've had this very fragile ceasefire holding in Yemen. There's been fighting on the ground, but we haven't seen Saudi airstrikes or Houthi attacks since March, which is very significant. But unfortunately, the blockade is still being imposed by the Saudis. They've let some ships into Hodeidah, the Red Sea port. They've let some flights out of the Sana'a airport, but from what I understand, not nearly as many as the Houthis want for this ceasefire. But yeah, there's always been infighting in between this government and the separatists that the Gulf countries also back in Yemen. It's just kind of a mess. But that is it for today. We got a good viewpoint from Ted Snyder up on the page about, it's titled, "Is There a Red Line Biden Won't Cross?" It's just, about all the provocations in Ukraine and Taiwan and just the dangerous road that we are going down. But that is it for today. I hope you guys are enjoying the show. You can contact us at news@antiwar.com. You can follow me on Twitter at @DeCampDave. Sign up for our newsletters, antiwar.com/newsletter. You can find it there. That's important. I want to get as many people signed up for that as we can. So go sign up. Subscribe to the show on YouTube. Download it where you listen to podcasts. And I will catch you guys tomorrow. Thank you.